Chapter 8. The King's Coffee Spies. By the middle of the 18th century, coffee had survived a lot. Ottoman death sentences, Meccan show trials, an English king's failed ban. You might think it had faced every possible form of government hostility. But Prussia still had a few tricks left. Its king would fight a war against coffee. That war involved crippled war veterans sniffing the air on street corners, a state-run roasting monopoly, and in one of history's more delightful footnotes, an entire comic opera written just to mock the whole affair. A king annoyed by his own trade deficit. Frederick the Great ruled Prussia from 1740 to 1786. He didn't object to coffee on religious or moral grounds like earlier rulers did. His objection was almost entirely economic. And refreshingly honest about it, Prussia grew no coffee of its own. Every bit of it came from foreign merchants. Frederick watched, more irritated each year, as Prussian silver flowed out of the country to pay for it. His first solution was simple: keep coffee a luxury for people whose spending he didn't mind. The nobility, the court, government officials. Soon, every self-respecting German court had its own coffee roasters, pots, and cups. Some of the finest examples were crafted in exquisite Meissen porcelain. Museums in Potsdam and Berlin still preserve some of these pieces today. The wealthy embraced coffee as a mark of status. Naturally, the poor watched their social betters enjoy the drink. They wanted it too. But they were told, essentially, that coffee wasn't for them. Partly because the king preferred it that way. Partly because of a medical claim doctors of the era were happy to supply. Coffee caused sterility, and any woman who drank it risked never bearing children. It was the same tactic used against coffee in Mecca 2 centuries earlier. Recruit compliant physicians. Let them supply a medical justification for what was, underneath it all, a political and economic decision. This slander against coffee became famous enough and absurd enough to inspire one of the strangest musical protests in coffee's history. We'll get to that shortly. By now this playbook should feel familiar. Mecca's governor once assembled physicians willing to testify that coffee was medically dangerous. He had already decided on other grounds that he wanted it banned. Frederick's Prussia found doctors just as willing to supply a convenient medical scare story. It covered up a purely economic grievance about silver leaving the country. The specific claim changes from century to century, country to country. Cold and dry humors in Mecca. Sterility in Prussia. But the pattern repeats. Borrowed medical authority props up a decision already made for entirely different reasons. My people must drink beer. By September 1777, Frederick decided gentle pressure wasn't working. Coffee had spread too far, too fast, among ordinary Prussians. He issued a formal manifesto on the subject. It remains almost startling in its bluntness. Frederick called it disgusting that so many of his subjects had taken up coffee. He complained bitterly about the money leaving the country. He flatly stated that his people needed to drink beer instead. He and his ancestors, he pointed out, had been raised on beer. So had his officers. He made an argument that reads almost like satire today. He insisted that soldiers raised on coffee could not be trusted to endure hardship or defeat an enemy in battle the way beer-drinking soldiers could. For a while, beer reclaimed its old place of honor. Coffee stayed something only the wealthy could really afford. But Frederick soon learned what every ruler in this book eventually learned. You cannot out-legislate a craving this widespread. Not even with the full machinery of Prussian military discipline behind you. Popular demand for coffee never went away, no matter how many royal manifestos said it should. The birth of the coffee police. In 1781, Frederick ran out of patience with half measures. He did something far more aggressive. He declared coffee roasting a royal monopoly. From that point on, roasting coffee anywhere in Prussia without government permission was against the law. He carved out exceptions for the nobility, the clergy, and government officials. They could apply for personal roasting licenses. He rejected nearly every application from ordinary commoners. A license to roast your own coffee became, quite literally, a badge of upper-class status. Everyone else had to buy their coffee, already roasted, directly from the crown. At prices the crown could inflate however it liked. It was an enormously profitable royal tax dressed up as regulation. And it worked exactly as intended. For a while, the arrangement generated Frederick a very handsome income. But laws like this create their own black markets. Prussia's poor did exactly what people throughout this book have consistently done when told they couldn't have coffee. They found ways to get it anyway in secret. Or they turned to substitutes instead. Coffee-like drinks brewed from roasted barley, wheat, corn, chicory root, and even dried figs. All of these sprang up almost overnight to fill the gap left by a drink most people could no longer legally or affordably obtain. Enforcing the monopoly against a black market this widespread required manpower. Frederick's administration found an unusually grim solution. They recruited discharged, wounded war veterans. They put them to work as full-time coffee informants. Their job was to patrol the streets day and night. They followed the smell of roasting coffee wherever they found it, hunting down anyone roasting beans without a license. As an incentive, these agents received a full quarter of whatever fine they collected from the people they caught. A bounty system built almost perfectly to produce aggressive, invasive harassment. The public wasn't amused by disabled veterans sniffing around their homes and businesses at all hours. They gave these agents a lasting, contemptuous nickname, the coffee smellers. One unplanned side effect of Frederick's monopoly outlasted the monopoly itself by more than a century. Ordinary Prussians turned to barley, wheat, corn, chicory, and dried fig substitutes during the years when real coffee sat locked behind royal roasting licenses. These substitutes didn't simply disappear once restrictions loosened. Chicory in particular took root as a genuine, lasting fixture of German coffee culture. People blended it into coffee by choice, by habit, and eventually by household tradition. Long after anyone needed to avoid the crown's roasting monopoly. What began as a forced substitute became, over generations, simply part of how many German households liked their coffee to taste. A strange, accidental gift from one king's economic anxiety to the palates of his descendants. It's a small preview of a bigger, more troubling theme we'll return to a few chapters from now. We'll look at just how far coffee sellers elsewhere were willing to go to stretch, dilute, and disguise their product once coffee became cheap and popular enough for outright fraud to turn profitable. Snitches, pulpits, and a failed copycat. Prussia wasn't the only German state to try something like this. In February 1784, the Elector of Cologne ruled over the Duchy of Westphalia. He issued his own coffee manifesto. He declared that the misuse of coffee had become so widespread across his territory that he was banning its sale entirely, roasted or unroasted, under threat of a massive fine or up to 2 years in prison for every offense. Every coffee house and roasting establishment in the duchy had to close within 4 weeks. Households could obtain coffee for personal use only in bulk lots of 50 pounds at a time. A threshold clearly designed to put the drink out of financial reach for anyone but the wealthy. The decree specifically singled out domestic workers, washerwomen and ironing women in particular. It forbid employers from letting them prepare or drink coffee at all. To make sure the ban got enforced, the elector offered informants half of whatever fine resulted from their tip, with a guarantee of complete anonymity. The decree was read aloud from church pulpits across the duchy. In case anyone had missed it, what followed was a wave of petty informing and coffee smelling. Contemporary accounts describe widespread bitterness and unhappiness across the region. In the end, it accomplished essentially nothing. Like every prohibition before it, it failed completely. People who have grown accustomed to a drink do not stop wanting it just because a decree was read aloud in church. Not every German ruler chose brute force prohibition. The Duke of Württemberg took a more entrepreneurial approach. He sold the exclusive right to operate coffee houses throughout his territory to a financier named Joseph Sees Oppenheimer. Sees Oppenheimer resold individual coffeehouse licenses to the highest bidders across the duchy. He quietly built a substantial personal fortune in the process. Historians have since credited him, somewhat wryly, as the first genuine coffee king. A private profiteer who figured out that controlling access to coffee could be just as lucrative as a royal monopoly, without any of the messy business of employing veterans to sniff rooftops for smoke. Bach's musical revenge. Here is where this whole sorry chapter of coffee history produced something genuinely wonderful. Amid all this state paranoia about coffee and all those medical claims about sterility and ruined health, the German composer Johann Sebastian Bach wrote a delightfully mischievous piece of music. It mocked the whole controversy directly. Bach isn't exactly remembered by history as a comedian, which makes this even better. Bach published the piece in Leipzig in 1732. Its German title, Schweigt still, plaudert nicht, translates roughly to be silent, stop chattering. Today we know it as the Coffee Cantata. It's a miniature comic opera, written for soprano, tenor, and bass. It tells the story of a stern old-fashioned father named Schlendrian, a name that translates loosely to slowpoke. He tries every trick he can think of to make his daughter give up her beloved coffee habit. Bach set the text to music with a light, almost operetta-like touch. Entirely unlike the serious religious works he's best remembered for today. The daughter, Lieschen, gets one of the cantata's most charming moments. She sings an aria declaring that coffee tastes lovelier than 1,000 kisses and sweeter than the finest muscatel wine. Her father tries threat after threat to break her habit. He eventually resorts to withholding her chances at marriage entirely. It works for a little while. But the cantata's final trio delivers the joke's real punchline. Once the mother and grandmother are revealed to enjoy their coffee just as much as the daughter does, the whole household's moral high ground collapses. The piece ends by essentially asking who could possibly blame the girl for wanting what everyone around her already secretly enjoyed. It's a wonderfully human piece of satire. It's aged remarkably well. The cantata was still being performed publicly nearly 2 centuries later, including a documented New York performance in December 1921. Frederick the Great may have written manifestos comparing coffee-drinking soldiers unfavorably to beer-drinking ones. He may have hired disabled veterans to sniff out illegal roasting. But it was Bach's playful little opera about a stubborn father and his coffee-loving daughter that actually captured the public mood correctly. No law, no fine, no royal monopoly was ever going to talk people out of wanting their coffee. The monopoly nobody could sustain. Frederick's royal roasting monopoly did generate real revenue for a time. Prussia's coffee restrictions dragged on in various forms for years. But exactly as had happened in Mecca, in Constantinople, and in London, the underlying demand for coffee never actually went away. No matter how thoroughly the law tried to suppress or monopolize it. Over time, restrictions loosened. Black markets shrank back into ordinary commerce. Coffee gradually took its place as one of the most popular everyday beverages in German life. As thoroughly woven into daily routine as it had become almost everywhere else it had traveled. It's worth putting this chapter next to Chapter 2's account of the Ottoman persecutions. The contrast is genuinely revealing. In Mecca and Constantinople, coffee was feared because it kept minds sharp and tongues loose. That threatened religious and political authority. In Prussia and Westphalia, nobody worried much about sharp minds or loose tongues. The fear here was purely financial. A mercantilist king, irritated that his subjects spent their money on a foreign import instead of homegrown beer. Different century. Different continent. Different justification entirely. Yet the results were almost identical. Informants, fines, black markets, public resentment, and eventually total failure. Coffee doesn't particularly care why a government wants to control it. It resists every kind of control with roughly the same stubborn persistence. What's coming next? We've now spent several chapters watching coffee survive religious bans, royal proclamations, and state monopolies. It's time to leave politics and economics behind for a while. Let's follow the bean itself. From the moment a coffee cherry ripens on its branch, through the demanding, often brutal physical process required to turn it into the roasted, ground product that ends up in a cup. In the next chapter, we trace the actual journey every coffee bean takes from tree to cup. It's a far more grueling process than most coffee drinkers have ever stopped to consider.